Hello everyone, welcome back to Smash Class. My name is Ramses and we're almost done with Smash Class. We've got a few final topics and they're juicy. Today, we're going to be talking about conditioning. So the last few topics are going to be regarding psychology, and last week we talked about how to approach a situation, how to understand the RPS, rock, paper, scissors, behind the situation. That is all preparation. Today we're going to talk about the mental war that is happening during a game. Let's get into this week's episode of Smash Class. So RPS is all about understanding situations, right? You know what your opponent could do, you know what their best options are, you know what your answers are, and then you start, playing the RPS. Now conditioning is where the consistency comes in. RPS in and of itself is not a very consistent game, right? We literally use it to decide random outcomes. Like, for example, hey, who's gonna go first in this match? Let's play rock, paper, scissors to find out. In other words, the outcome is all but random. So that's actually not entirely the case. So if you look at RPS, rock, paper, scissors, there's actually tournaments. There's actually RPS tournaments where there are certain people that always make it to the top. And the difference between those people who always make it to the top and people who, have that inconsistent outcome is psychology, and more accurately, it's conditioning. So the part about conditioning that you need to understand is it's all about understanding how the opponent is thinking about the game, right? So conditioning in and of itself is basically trying to make your opponent do something through information that you're feeding. So conditioning, very famous experiment in terms of conditioning was Pavlov's dog, right? Where he would ring the bell and then feed his dog. And eventually the dog would associate the ringing of the bell with being fed. So every time he would hear the bell ring, he would want to eat, he would get hungry. In other words, he got conditioned to expect food when the bell rings. Now, there's this very similar thing you can do in Smash in a lot of different ways, and that's the cool thing about conditioning. There are a lot of ways in which you can condition the opponent. So a very, very simple example is your movement, right? So when you're moving towards your opponent, you often try to attack them. In other words, you're gonna condition them to expect an attack when you move forward. Very simple, like, you show a certain piece of information, and based on the information, your opponent builds an expectation. Another example would be, hey, if you're jumping in the air, your opponent expects you to do an aerial attack, right? So the jumping, the information, is a bait, or can be used as a bait, because now that your opponent is expecting you to attack, they might be using shield, and then you can not attack, land, and grab them out of their shield. So conditioning is all about showing your opponent certain information, making them expect something based on that information, right? So you cannot just do an empty landing from the get-go. You have to actually show, hey, when I jump, I'd like to do attacks, right? So you need to feed them the information, and then you're going to punish them for assuming that information. A very important part of the game. So this is how you pull this RPS thing in your favor. So you might know, hey, these are the optimal options, this is how I want to beat them. But through consistently, like say you're playing against a Mario player, they're always grabbing you. And hey, the RPS answer to grab is to spot dodge, to roll, to dodge, to get out of the way, right? At a certain point, they are going to stop grabbing. So through avoiding their move, you're also conditioning them to grab less. Because if they continue grabbing, they're going to lose, right? So conditioning is not even something that you have to do intentionally, right? It's not always, hey, I know they expect me to land with an aerial here, so I'm not going to do it. It can also just be a natural result of the way you play rock, paper, scissors. To kind of pull it back to the RPS example, if you're constantly using scissors and your opponent's constantly using rock, then eventually you're going to stop using scissors. That is conditioning, right? And even though they're not trying to bait you into doing what they want, it's just the result changes your options. Now, this is something that you need to look at from two sides, right? So one side you need to look at it from is, how can I use this to win, right? So how can I condition my opponent and make them expect certain actions and then surprise them? The other side that you need to understand is avoiding conditioning, right? So when you are the Mario main who wants to grab the opponent and your opponent keeps dodging, it's important that, of course, don't keep grabbing, right? If your option loses, don't keep using it. But that doesn't mean that you should immediately start committing in different ways. You should be wary of, hey, so what is my opponent going to do now that I'm stopping my grabs? So that's another part that's important about the RPS, is that sometimes it's about the optimal options, but the way you win RPS is through understanding your opponent. So when you grab and you realize, hey, he's dodging, he's rolling, he's jumping, he's doing everything he can to stop me from grabbing. But I don't really see a pattern. It's not good to start committing to another option, right? So hey, grab's not working, let me run up and do a rising aerial. That is a very extreme way of playing the game. What you should be thinking about instead is, okay, he intends to dodge my grab. So what I should be doing is I should be approaching him, I should be showing my forward movement, right? That leads into the grab, and then I should be looking at what he's doing, right? Gather the information, understand, hey, which options does he use, what is the pattern, etc., etc. And it's hard to do so when you're focusing on your own options, right? So a large part of conditioning is taking the time to actually look at your opponent, okay? So very important to understand these things. One, you want to use conditioning yourself to make your opponent do things that are advantageous for you. Two, you want to not get conditioned yourself. So when things you're doing when the things you're doing fail, you should be taking some time, taking a step back and recalibrating and observing your opponent. And three, the best way to make the most out of conditioning is to observe. And it's hard to observe while you're pressing buttons. So at the same time, it's important that you observe through patient play, through reactions, through observation. It's hard to observe while you're also doing everything that you want to do. The most important thing to understand about conditioning is that it's not about using your strongest move. It's not about using your biggest move. It's not about using your safest move. The most important thing about playing Smash is to hit your opponent, right? Just like rock, paper, scissors, even if rock is stronger than the other options, right? In this theoretical version of rock, paper, scissors, where we say, hey, rock gives you 2 points and paper and scissors only give you 1, you still have to use other moves other than rock, because if they're constantly using paper, your rock will still not win. And then eventually, after you use, hey, say they're using paper, you're going to use scissors, they're going to use rock themselves, you use paper, they're going to use scissors to beat your paper, then you can use your rock, right? So it always comes full circle, but the most important part about conditioning is to stay ahead of the circle, right? Don't get caught behind as your opponent starts understanding what you're doing. You always have to understand more about your opponent than they do about you. So get into a game, try it out, figure out, hey, what are my strong options? How does my opponent like to counterplay that, right? So we're going to figure out the RPS, and then when you get into a game, try to condition your opponent, try to read your opponent. Try to use the things you've learned about conditioning to force reactions and then punish them dearly. It's a combination, right? You got to do the prep first. You got to understand the RPS first, what we talked about last week. And then we're going to use that knowledge with our conditioning, with our reading, with our understanding. It's a lot of empathy. It's about understanding, hey, why does my opponent do what they do? Because that's when you can start to punish them basically every turn of the game. For now, guys, that was everything. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And next week, we're going to get into the final episode of Smash Class, where we get deeper into improving. So now that we've learned everything, how do you iterate on it? How do you keep getting stronger? If that's what interests you, then next week, you should be tuning into Smash Class. For now, of course, my name was Ramses. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Good luck implementing the conditioning yourself, and I'll see you guys next week. Stay smart.